this into a perfect square. I know that 4 and 4 is going to be 8. So this factors. And 4 and 4 multiply to 16, and then I need a -8, so that would be -4 and -4. -4 adds to -8, and -4 times -4 is 16. Now I would like to put this, I have 2 of them, and now I'm ready to solve. I would solve by undoing a square with a square root. That would be plus or minus the square root. We get x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 25 is 5. And now I need to shift the 4 over to the right. I need to add 4 to both sides. X equals 4 plus or minus 5, and that is an answer that I can simplify. We have 4 plus 5, and then 4 minus 5. Solve by completing the square. All right, completing the square. The first thing that we need to make sure is that the leading coefficient A has a 1. That's the very first thing. So 1, A needs to be a 1. And it is. If it wasn't, then we would be dividing both sides by that leading coefficient. Step 2, we want to move the constant to one side of the equation. We have x squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0, and I'm going to move the constant, positive 4, to the right. So we have x squared minus 12x equals negative 4. I'm leaving room to complete the square. Make a perfect square trinomial by adding half of b squared to both sides of the equation. So that would be x squared minus 12x. We need to half the b term. This is b. A is 1, b is negative 12, and c is 4. So we need to half the b term and then square it. We're going to half it and then square it. And we need to add that to both sides of the equation. So negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6, and negative 6 squared is positive 36. Now we have a perfect square trinomial. We have x and x, 6 and 6, and that would be negative 6 plus negative 6 is negative 12, and then negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. 36 minus 4, and we're solving by completing the square. So now I'm going to write this. We have 2 of them, and now we're back to example 1. Let's see. After we made the perfect square trinomial, then we factor the quadratic. We also simplified. We are going to start solving by undoing a square. The opposite of squaring is square root plus or minus the square root. We get x minus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 32. We do need to reduce the square root of 32. What do we have in 32? We have 8 times 4, but 8 still has another 4 in it for a perfect square. So that would be 16 times 2 then. So the square root of 16 is 4, and there's a 2 left under the square root. So we have x minus 6 equals plus or minus 4 square roots of 2. And then we're going to shift the 6 to the right-hand side. The opposite of a negative 6 would be to add 6 to both sides. X equals 6 plus or minus 4 square roots of 2. Solve by completing the square. Step 1, make sure that the a is a 1, and it's not. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide it out. We're going to divide it from this side, and we're going to divide it from this side. That means that you're dividing all these terms. So 2 divided by 2 leaves x squared. 8 divided by 2 is 4x. 14 divided by 2 is 7 equals 0. Step 1 is done. The next step would be to move the constant to the other side. That would be x squared plus 4x equals minus 7. Step 2 is done. Step 3, make a perfect square trinomial by halving the b term and then squaring it and then adding it to both sides of the equation. So we have x squared plus 4x, and I need to add that to both sides of the equation. So we're going to half the 4 and then square it. Negative 7 plus half of 4 squared. Be x squared plus 4x, half of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4, equals negative 7 is 4. Factor the perfect square trinomial. Perfect square trinomial, we have x times x, 2 and 2, and that would be positive 2 and positive 2 multiplied to 4, and add to 4. Equals, simplifying the right side, negative 3. X plus 2 squared equals negative 3. Now we're ready to solve. So I'm going to undo the square root. Plus or minus the square root. We get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 3. We need to simplify that. We have a negative under the radicand, that's imaginary. And I'm going to shift the 2 over by subtracting 2. X equals negative 2 plus or minus I square roots of 3. And that is as far as I can go. That is as far as I can go because I can't combine i's with real numbers. So step 1. Step 2 is to move the constant to the other side. Step 3 was to make a perfect square trinomial to both sides. Step 4 was to create a factored from perfect square trinomial. And the last step was to solve. Write y equals x squared minus 10x plus 22 in vertex form. Then identify the vertex. So now we have another way to find the vertex. This would have been in vertex form if I had the negative 3 on the left side. So we're doing all of this, and we're going to be stopping at this point and not solving. We're going to find the vertex. So completing the square is good for 2 things. 1, the vertex. 2, the roots. Step 1, A needs to be 1, and it is. Step 2 would be to have this equation set to 0 and shift the constant to the other side of the equation. So negative 22 equals x squared minus 10x. Step 3 would be to create a perfect square trinomial. We're going to half the middle term, we're going to half the b term, and then square it. So I'm going to add to this side half of negative 10 squared, and I'm adding to this side half of negative 10 squared. So x squared minus 10x, we have negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5, square is 25. 3 equals factor x 5, and that would have to be negative 5 and negative 5 to add to negative 10 and multiply to positive 25. The only thing I have to do to have it in vertex form is to have the number on the other side. That's your k value. So we have 0 equals x minus 5 squared, subtracting 3, and that would be y equals x minus 5 squared minus 3. Identify the vertex. The vertex would be 5, negative 3. The height y in feet of a baseball t seconds after it is hit is given by the function y equals negative 16t squared plus 96t plus 3. Find the maximum height of the baseball. Maximum height of the baseball. What's the maximum height? All right. We have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 96t plus 3. I see that a is not by itself. I also see that when I divide by negative 16, it's not going to work out evenly with this 3. So I would like to show you a little bit more of a technique. I'm going to put the 3 on the other side to get my t terms by themselves. So we have negative 3 equals negative 16t squared plus 96t. Another technique that I can do here is that because I just have my t's on the right-hand side, I can factor something out from those two. And I'd like to factor out the negative 16. Negative 3 equals negative 16 times t squared, and then 96 divided by 16 is 6. So 96 divided by negative 16 would be a negative 6t. And I'm leaving room to complete that square. That is another way that you can do these problems. The next step would be to create that perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to do half of the b term, half of negative 6, and then squared. Half of negative 6 squared. We get negative 16 times t squared minus 6t. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, and negative 3 squared is 9. So we have 9 minus 3. I'm going to factor this trinomial, leave the 16 out front, t, 3, and then negative 3 and negative 3 would be negative 6, and then multiply to positive 9 equals 6, negative 16, and we have t minus 3 squared equals 6. Did I do this correctly? I would say no. This is a mistake that students always forget. When I added 9 to this side, that's not really how it's not being balanced here. This needs to be balanced. And it's not. I didn't just add 9 to this side. I added negative 16 times 9. That means I need to add to this side, not 9. I need to add to this side times negative 16 times that. So that would be 9 times negative 16, which would be negative 144. I was trying to avoid having to work with fractions, and I forgot about the negative 16 out front here being multiplied to this 9. That was 144, negative 144. And then negative 144 and negative 3 is negative 147. So we have 0 equals negative 16, t minus 3 squared, add 147 to both sides. And now I can see that that vertex is at 3, 147. So 3, and then the height here is 147. The maximum height of the baseball is 147 feet. Therefore, maximum height of the baseball is 147.